In today's episode of HR Visionaries, we talk to Sarah from Curve. We talk about all her learnings from different kind of industries. Stay tuned. Welcome to HR Visionaries, where we unlock the secrets of modern HR. I'm Benjamin, your host. Join us as we shed light on today's HR universe with HR leaders and innovators from across the globe. Whether you're an HR pro, a business leader, or just curious about the future of work, this is your shortcut to the forefront of HR innovation. Brought to you by Hire, the AI talent attraction platform. Welcome to the latest episode of HR Visionaries. I'm very much looking forward to my guest today, Sarah. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Sarah, can you tell us a bit about yourself? Who are you?
Sure. So my name is Sarah Cox. I lead the people function at Curve. We're a UK headquartered fintech on a mission to make money simpler and more enjoyable, if that's possible.
Okay, can you tell us a bit about what you mean with making money simpler?
Yeah, sure. So really the idea behind Curve is to create an operating system for money. So you think about Spotify in terms of, our access to music, well, actually a lot more than music now. So really that's what we're looking to do, is to sort of demystify and simplify people's finances by creating a easy to use, intuitive interface in the form of an app where customers can access money needs. Primarily at the moment, it's around payments. So debit cards and credit cards all linking to one smart app and card.
It's absolutely fascinating, given money is certainly one of the main concerns of basically everyone, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think there are too many people who would say they enjoy spending a lot of time, on money, financial admin. So it's really about, how can we make it simple, easy, and really help people go and do the things they enjoy more and celebrate life.
Indeed. Sorry, you mentioned you lead the people function at Curve. What's your actual title?
So my title is Senior Vice President of People. I have to say, at my age, I'm not so keen on the senior piece. It has too many sort of age connotations. But yeah, so I and within that is everything from talent acquisition through to leadership development, employee experience, and everything in between.
Cool. That was exactly what I wanted to find out. What you actually do. Can you tell us a bit about how long have you been in the people area, and what do you enjoy most?
So I actually spent my first 22 years of work at American Express, not in the people or HR function. So my background is leading operations, marketing, and product teams. And I did that for many years, obviously, UK, sort of regional, international, and global teams as well. But always through that time, the real love was building, leading high-performing teams. So it was always for me about performance. How do we enable and lift people so that they can perform at their highest level? And when I left Amex, I have to confess I didn't really have a plan. It was very much a personal decision for me at the time in terms of the amount of travel I was doing. And an opportunity came up to pivot function, company size, and industry all at once. So I thought, why not? And joined an event company, so a medium-sized business, to lead the HR and people team. It was a very small team, and so this is now my third founder-led business, but again, different industries. So I went from events into private equity, and then from private equity to fintech.
Well, when
when you compare your career in marketing, building teams there and building teams in the HR space, what are the key differences?
So I think, firstly, and it doesn't directly answer your question about building the team, so I'll come back to that. But as a discipline and as a function, marketing has a lot in common with your role as a people function leader. So if I think about, my responsibility as a marketing leader, it's all about acquiring customers, engaging customers, developing customers, let's say in the form of maybe cross-sell, upsell, retaining customers. And my approach moving into HR and people was really like, what do I know, which is customer lifecycle management, and how do I then apply that to people? But the beauty of that within an organization is, unlike a B2C or B2B marketing organization, your customers are there with you. Okay, not the prospective customers, you still have to go and find them, but the existing customer base is there. So that, I guess my experience was a little bit like I felt like a kid in a sweet shop. All of a sudden, you don't need to commission some research, you just go and talk to some people, and understand like what's your experience. And so I think the application and the transferability of the function is really relevant. In terms of then coming back to your question, building teams, for me, it's always been about, what skills, what experience, what strengths and talents do people bring? How do you match that to the role? And then how do you elevate the group together so that you get the synergy of team performance? And I think most of us have probably had the experience of seeing a team where maybe the individual talent in itself was extremely high, but for some reason, the team didn't work as effectively. Whereas my view has always been, I'd rather take less like technical expertise, but more attitude, cultural understanding, behavior, and bring those individuals together to achieve a common purpose. And that's what I've loved. So the great thing about that is, to a certain extent, it doesn't really matter what function. I mean, I don't think I'd be a great finance leader, for example. I don't probably have the attention to detail that you need there. But you can take that anywhere, inside and outside of work, to be honest.
Indeed, and talking about people functions, retaining talents, it has indeed a lot to do with keeping clients happy, keeping co-workers happy, keeping the team happy. So it's very strongly related.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll come back to the question of happiness, because I think you can have a very happy team and that aren't performing, but which is obviously not the point. But I think the actually, retention, it starts all the way, at the point of or even prior to perhaps the relationship solidifying. And that's, one of the projects that I worked on a long time ago, when I was American Express, was looking at, the retention rates in the consumer business in Europe, and how do we improve those. And I was very fortunate to work with one of the major consulting companies who did some, lots of very clever analysis for us, and pointed out that, actually what you need to do is, really focus on the early experience, like early engagement. And, this is like 25 years ago, probably now. Everyone's doing that now, but at the time it was quite new, because a lot of the retention efforts tended to happen, at the point that someone said, I've had enough, thanks, your product doesn't meet my needs anymore. So in the same way that I'd learned, in the consumer business, retention really starts at the point that the relationship, is starting. And what do you do to really ensure that, that early experience is is positive. And if you think about from an employee perspective, I don't know anyone, I've never met someone who on the first day of their role is not highly engaged, excited, full of opportunity, potential. So really, from a leadership perspective, and it's not a people, people focus on this, but it's every single leader in the organization, is how do you take that, energy, enthusiasm and talent, and enable and lead performance through that, both at an individual level and then again back to the team. And to your question about happy, or your point about happy, I love people being happy. I think happy people, and it's contagious. However, if I've got someone on my team who's really happy and not delivering, then I'm failed as a leader.
How do you balance those topics? Well, happiness and performance. Well, probably one should focus on both topics.
Yeah.
However, well, as a company, you need to keep it profitable. You need to look at, are the customers happy? Are stakeholders, shareholders happy? So therefore, happiness is important. However, performance is also important.
Yeah, and they're very linked. Okay, we measure engagement as many companies do, both from a customer perspective and satisfaction, and an employee perspective. And there are numerous studies around the world that demonstrate the impact of engaged workforce on customer satisfaction, productivity, profitability. One of the things that I did before I moved actually from the event space into private equity is I took some time out and I certified as a coach with Gallup for their Clifton Strengths tool, which is a tool that I'd used previously, but sort of like, I was going to say used incompetently, probably not incompetently, but I'd used the tool because I'd come across it. But I didn't have necessarily the sort of like the full depth of understanding and appreciation of how to really leverage that with both individuals and teams. And Gallup have done a lot of work to understand, how to drive engagement so that, and they've always been very clear that the outcome is performance. We're driving engagement because it makes business sense. And, if you don't have highly engaged people, highly committed people, when you really need them to pull out all the stops, whether that's to drive a transformational change or recover from, a significant crisis, like, for example, in financial crisis in 2008, you won't have that. You don't have those credits, if you like, with those individuals to do everything that you need them to do for you.
Sarah, can we perhaps jump back to the time when you changed career and went from the functions at Amex to the people functions? What were your initial thoughts about the people functions, and what were your ideas when you joined?
Well, I think one of the things that really interested and attracted me was the sort of where people sits. So it's really at the sort of intersection of, brand, culture, strategy, and I like to be involved. I like to be part of the conversation. One of the moving to a smaller organization, certainly part of the appeal was, not only can I influence through my own team, but it's the opportunity to work with and influence leaders to bring the performance of the organization up. So, and I think from way back when I was at Amex, I'd always been interested in, organizational psychology, people development. I mean, I found myself always drawn to, in my spare time, which there wasn't a lot of, but the content that I looked for, the articles that caught my attention were always about, were always people related, and actually, a mentor of mine said to me once, look, you're a great marketing leader. I think you could be an outstanding people leader. And, part of it was also a little bit of, yeah, I want to be outstanding. Thank you very much. And why not, really? What have I love learning. It was the opportunity to kind of start again and learn. And yet, having spent a long time in, an incredible large company. I mean, my time at Amex was a phenomenal sort of training ground, and they invest. I'm sure they still do, but I left more than 10 years ago. But the opportunity to invest in my own development, the focus that was placed on doing things right from a people perspective, ensuring that expectations were clear, ensuring that you invest time in thinking about succession planning. There's so much that I could take from what I'd seen at Amex, and then think about how I applied that in very different organizations. So, yeah.
So when you started back then in the HR people function, how did you how was working with more experienced HR professionals who were, however, in your reporting line? So people who reported to you had much more experience in the HR field.
Yeah. And actually, I mean, my very first job as a leader was a team manager in a call center in the early 90s. And it was exactly in the same position. So, I was leading a team of 10 people who were doing something that I'd never done. I couldn't do their role. And so I'd had that experience really early on. And I actually think that helped me. I think that's helped me as a leader. I think the fact that my first leadership role, I was technically incompetent in terms of what the team was doing, was brilliant, because then I had to think, okay, how am I going to therefore add value? What is my role? How am I going to work with these individuals? How am I going to be credible? And it was really thinking about, okay, they know how to do their individual role well, and this applies back to the HR team that I inherited. But what they don't necessarily have is from a HR perspective now, the sort of the business understanding, the sort of commercial background, the sense of actually what does the rest of the organization need from us? Because having been a internal customer of HR for a number of years, I was pretty clear on where I felt they could really add value and where actually I didn't need that support. And so I think that helped. And I've always been very much about who am I working with and how can I help develop and enable them. And I mean, that's worked for me. Of course, you could ask them and they may give you a different answer, but yeah, that's been my approach.
Right. What do you recommend people who are, either in your shoes or in the shoes of those HR professionals who now suddenly have a boss who is, a leader or has been leader in different field and is now leader of an HR team? What do you recommend both of those people in terms of how to make the relationship work best?
So I think I'm going to make an assumption here that anyone in that position from a leader's perspective is going to be really curious about what do I need to learn, how what's important, so I think the first piece is those individuals, so I'm assuming I'm an individual who's inheriting a leader who doesn't know my function. So as an individual, I will be thinking, how do I a couple of things, like one is like, how do I help this leader integrate and upskill in terms of what do they need to know as effectively as possible. And actually, I had this experience, not so much from a technical perspective, but when I joined Curve, that my people operations lead at the time did a fantastic job of organizing what I needed to what she felt I needed to understand about the business. And she said to me, look, it's intense here. It's fast paced. I know you're going to have, so many different things flying across your desk. I've been thinking about, like, what do I need to do to help you onboard as quickly and effectively as possible? And that's a really generous, I mean, it was extraordinarily generous of her. And it really helped me. So whether it's the function you don't know or the business you don't know, I think that the team that you're coming in to lead can really help in terms of your education. But I also think, there are many leaders, across the business who don't have like technical understanding of the groups that they're leading, particularly as you're more senior leaders. But what they do have is that experience of understanding, what are the problems that we're trying to solve in the organization? What are the critical issues? What are the future challenges? What's keeping the CEO up at night, the CEO up at night? How does that, and then even if you don't have the technical understanding and appreciation, you know enough about the questions that you need to ask. And I think as the leader going into a new function, it's about being curious and respecting the experience and the expertise, but also not being afraid to challenge it, because there will always be new, different perspectives and different ways of doing things. And just because something's been done, for 2 or 3 years doesn't mean to say it's the way that it's going to be successful going forward, as we all know, with so much change now.
What would you do in a situation where you don't experience that openness from one of the sides? Let's say, well, your HR professional and your team leader arrives, he or she is not very open to any suggestions, or vice versa. So in a situation where there is no openness, perhaps even reluctance or hostility. So how would you deal with that situation?
So I think it's getting to understand the why, isn't it? So, if I've got a new leader who's come in and made no effort to understand, what I or my team do, there could be so many different reasons for that. One could be he has complete trust in what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. So, another could be he has absolutely no interest and is thinking of offshoring the function. I mean, you could take the sublime to the ridiculous. There's so many different reasons why. It could be that, they have, they're responsible for 8 different functions, and actually there are fires burning in 3. You're not one of those, and therefore you're actually just not going to get the attention in the short term. So I think it's really getting to understand that individual as best you can, what their priorities are, what their concerns are, what they need to be successful in their role, and trying different approaches, and also what do they value, and how do they value. Ultimately we all have choices. So, as and I've said this to people before, and I've thought it myself, at some point, if the relationship is not working and it's not effective, and you've tried what you could, or you've maybe leveraged others to, see, well, this person seems really interested in your area, they're not interested in my area. What is it that you have, what is it that you've done? How have you worked with this individual? But at some point you then have to say, okay, what am I getting out of this relationship? Am I getting what I need from my leader? And if you're not, it's time to move, either internally if you have the opportunity, if it's a large company, or externally. But I think what's really important is that the leader gets the feedback, that because they may not know. You don't sit and just either rant to yourself or to a colleague. You find out, you give the feedback, and people always have a choice with feedback. You can take it and you can do something about it, or not. And as the person providing the feedback, what you can do is provide effective feedback. What have you seen? What do you observe? How does that make you think, feel? What do you want them to do? Ultimately, it's then down to them.
Sarah, can you tell us a bit about your vision for HR over the next, for the time horizon, the next few years? So what is something you guys are working on at the moment that will be very important for the next few years?
So, I mean, one thing which is very top of mind, because we literally just kicked off a new program last week, is leadership development, is developing our leaders. Because in a startup, often what happens is fast growth at some point. The early teams, people are promoted into people leader roles, and the pace, the time, the individual sort of contribution responsibility that they have doesn't go away. And so I think my experience certainly in Curve has been, there's always a lot of intensity and pressure on delivering. As a new people leader, you then have to really value the time that you're spending with your team, with individuals on your team, against the time that you're spending on delivering yourself. And I think if you don't have the experience, it's easy to default to, I need to get like what I've committed to done. And teams and team members are therefore not, necessarily developed, directed, delegated to, all the different aspects of leadership in the way that is going to be most effective for the individuals on their team. So when I joined, which was 2.5 years ago now, we had a head of L&D at the time. We're a much smaller group now. And there'd been some manager training done, so new manager training. But one of the challenges we had was that those people were coming out of the training and they were kind of looking further up the organization and saying, but hang on a second, I've just learned about this kind of coaching framework, but I don't see it, So no one's role modeling for me what I've just learned, and therefore it's sending the message that actually this is not that important. So this time we're starting with the top of the organization, and we're focusing on really taking leaders through a journey of, first, it's all around self-awareness and self-leadership. Because as a leader, who you are and how you see the world and how you behave has such a fundamental impact. So we've spent 2 days, very much focused on, who are individuals in terms of their talents, their values, their beliefs, their perception in the organization, from their leader, from their team, from their peers. The next face-to-face session will be leading others, so very much focused on setting direction, providing performance management feedback, succession planning, talent development, and then the final face-to-face will be leading high-performing teams, so moving from individual to team. And I'm really excited about it, partly because it's a subject that I really enjoy, and because I see the need, and also the benefit of individual leaders having time to focus on themselves and to reflect on, who am I, how do I lead, and what do I need to do differently, and where are my blind spots, and where are my greatest strengths, and how do I put those into effect. And I think that that is a real focus for us as an organisation, and will have, if executed effectively, it will have an impact on the performance of our teams.
Can you tell us a bit about how you implemented all these measures? So it feels like, well, it was quite a big project. So to get, well, managers who naturally grew into their new roles to reflect, to think about, okay, what am I doing right? What can I grow into? It's just require, well, lots of implementation work, I guess.
Yes, and I think, but you know, every to be fair, every organisation I've worked in, I've always really enjoyed the people that I've worked with, and I've always been felt very privileged to sort of work with really talented individuals, you know, both on my teams and you know, my peers. And I think there's a, you know, the people that I work with, the leaders that we have at Curve, you know, they're curious, they're hungry, they're ambitious, they're kind, you know, they're generous, they want to lead effectively and lead well. And so actually, sure, I mean, I remember one person saying to me, you know, I can still do a couple of, you know, in these 2 days, I can still take a few meetings, can't I? And the answer is no, you will not. I'll give you some breaks, but you really need to dedicate, you know, your commitment to yourself. And actually, you know, it's not a hard sell at all. You know, I work with people who just want to be better. They want to be, you know, the best version of themselves that they possibly can be. And so it's it's more about thinking, who do we bring in? And we've been very deliberate in ensuring that this is a Curve exec led initiative. So, you know, the first session was 2.5 hours with our CEO. You know, and it was really important to me that he was the one to talk about, like, what does leading at Curve look like? You know, what do we value? Why do we value? And it was a really interactive session using specific examples from things that had happened in the past, and thinking about, you know, our leadership principles and how would you behave. You know, here's what happened. You know, if you're acting in according with our leadership principles, what would you do? And how would you do that? And where would the risks be? So it's a time commitment from all our senior leaders, which I think has been really noted and appreciated by the people who've just started the program.
Sarah, thank you so much for all your insights. It was super interesting to learn about your story, about what you're currently doing at Curve. Thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it.
And thank you so much for listening in, and see you next time.